We're going to talk about how one very important aspect of homeostasis, and that is water balance, how the amount of water in the body is controlled. Okay, now where the detectors for osmolarity are found is in the region of the brain called the hypothalamus, which is here. Okay, if the blood is too dilute, hypotonic, then what will happen is water will enter the cells of the hypothalamus and they will swell up, and they will detect that. Conversely, if the blood is too concentrated, there's not enough water there and there's too much stuff dissolved in there for the volume, the cells of the hypothalamus will shrink and they will then cause the secretion of a hormone called ADH, sometimes, which stands for antidiuretic hormone. Diuresis is producing large volumes of dilute urine. So this is antidiuretic hormone. Stops you, makes concentrated urine. This hormone is also called vasopressin. So if your blood is too concentrated, the hypothalamus will cause the pituitary gland to secrete this hormone. If it's too dilute, there will be no ADH produced. Interesting, ADH is an interesting hormone. It's only 9 amino acids long. It's really small. It's made by the cells of the hypothalamus, and it travels from the hypothalamus down to the pituitary gland, down the axon. So the cells of the hypothalamus are modified neuron cells, and the hormone actually passes down and is secreted by the pituitary gland into the bloodstream. Now, the main target for ADH, the target organ, are the cells lining the collecting ducts of the in the kidney. So let's just reacquaint ourselves with the kidney here, and see what happens. Okay, so I have drawn a kidney on the left there, with the renal cortex on the outside, the pale bit, and you've got the renal medulla on the inside, and this is called the pelvis of the kidney, and that's where the urine collects. Right, so here I've drawn a neuron, a nephron, and so the blood is filtered here in the Bowman's capsule. So you produce a large volume of dilute filtrate here, which enters the proximal convoluted tubule, then goes through the loop of Henle, which we've talked about in previous videos, distal convoluted tubule, and the filtrate is finally, after certain things are reabsorbed, is finally ends up in the collecting duct. And the collecting ducts, then that passes out to the pelvis and the ureter onto the bladder. So if I just draw the position of the collecting ducts there, so here's the collecting ducts will pass through the renal cortex like that. Okay, and at the top end there, I'll just draw that little, it's supposed to be a Bowman's capsule. So there's all the collecting ducts, and they pass through the medulla. Now, in a previous video, we've seen that the medulla has got a very high salt concentration, which is principally generated by the loop of Henle that generates the high salt concentration. And you can see, as I've drawn here, that red arrow, the thickness of it indicates how concentrated the sodium chloride concentration is, and it decreases the deeper you get into the renal medulla. Now, what that means is you've got this dilute urine passing through the collecting duct, and outside you've got a very high concentration of sodium chloride. So under certain circumstances, we've seen in the presence of ADH, if you've got ADH present, water will leave the collecting ducts by osmosis into the renal medulla, and it will find its way into the interstitium, this area is called, and it will find its way from the interstitium into the blood vessels in the renal medulla, which is called a vasorector, and they'll get into the blood and be returned. The water will return to general circulation. So if you do have ADH, water can be retrieved from the urine, and it can stop any further water loss occurring. Of course, it won't. That happens when your blood's too concentrated. It will just stop it getting even more concentrated. It won't actually dilute it. And the other mechanism, of course, is the hypothalamus. If your blood is concentrated, it will make you feel thirsty, and that will encourage you to drink and restore the correct water balance. Right, let's now see how does ADH, how does it have its effect on the collecting duct. So I've just drawn here, I've drawn a cell lining the collecting duct. Okay, so on this side we've got the filtrate. This is where the dilute urine is passing, and this is the interstitium. And not forgetting that this has got a high NaCl concentration here. Right. In the absence of ADH, water cannot pass through the membrane. It can't get through these membranes. Okay, because they're impermeable to water. But in the presence of ADH, you'll get certain protein channels inserted in there called aquaporins. They're protein channels in the lipid bilayer, I'll draw some there, which allow water molecules to pass through them. And ADH will cause these to be inserted into the membranes of the collecting duct cells. So that means water can pass out of the interstitium here by osmosis, and of course that's going to lower the water concentration inside the cell here, so that will cause water to pass from the filtrate into the collecting duct cell. And this water will eventually end up back in the blood vessels and return to the blood. So ADH then is the hormone which stops you losing water in your urine. So if you're thirsty, you will be producing ADH, and you'll produce a small volume of concentrated urine. If you've drunk lots of water, your blood is dilute, then ADH production will stop, and you'll produce a large volume of dilute urine. Interestingly, there's also a diurnal rhythm with ADH. It is produced at night time when you're asleep, and that stops you producing very large volumes of water, very large volumes of urine when you're asleep, and from that waking you up. And you may have experienced, if you've ever had jet lag, one of the things you get is that you keep waking up in the middle of the night with a full bladder like it's the daytime, and that's because your sort of diurnal rhythms are all messed up. Also, there's a very rare condition called diabetes insipidus. Insipidus means tasteless. Normal diabetes we talk about is diabetes mellitus, sweet urine. This is insipid, tasteless urine. And one of the symptoms of diabetes insipidus is produce very large volumes of dilute urine, become dehydrated, and it's usually caused by tumors to the pituitary gland, which are messing up the correct secretion of ADH. So that is basically how water balance is controlled. And just before we finish, I'll just say also ADH does have some effect on this part of the loop of Henle. And what it does is it encourages sodium excretion from that part of the loop of Henle. And if you understand the physiology of the loop of Henle, you'll realize that that will mean that this sodium chloride concentration gradient will be stronger if you're secreting more sodium. So ADH also helps in water retention in that way.